So I'm going to go talk about the Buddhist stuff today. We spent the last time talking about the Buddha's life story. Any questions about the Buddha's life story that we talked about last time? Do you have the general outlines of the Buddha's life story? Because this will definitely be on the test. Okay? Guys got the outline. Buddha was a guy who was raised in a hedonistic environment until he was about 30. And then he goes off and does exactly the opposite. He lives his life as an ascetic monk, depriving himself of everything, scourging the flesh to free the spirit. And then realizes that doesn't work either, and then decides on a middle way, something in between the two extremes. Okay? Yes?
Your lectures are posted on Canvas, right?
They're on Canvas, yes.
They
this
are?
lecture is on Canvas.
Are they under modules? Or
They're under modules for this week. Yeah,
Okay.
it should be there. Okay. So that's the Buddhist life story. Tries the extremes, and he decides that really the way to enlightenment, to happiness, to get away from the suffering of the world, the suffering of samsara, is a middle way. And he goes and sits down under the tree, and he meditates. He vows not to get up until he gets enlightened, and then he starts having all sorts of revelations about things, which we're going to talk about today, and then is able on the last night in the morning to wake up, or the next day, the morning dawns, he's going to wake up, he's been awake, he's meditating, and he becomes enlightened. And remember, he doesn't want to teach. It's too complicated, people aren't going to get it. Indra comes down, says, please help me make my job easier, help teach these human beings are pathetic. He agrees to teach human beings, and the first people he teaches are?
Merchants and businessmen.
Merchants, business people, right? And what is the meaning of that?
The importance of commerce.
The importance of commerce. That commerce is a what kind of principle? Civilizing principle. It contributes to nonviolence in the world. Okay? How many, think about modern times right now, and I'm not going to be political about this. So I don't care if you're conservative or liberal about this. It doesn't really matter. Think about China right now. China is a huge power. You know, they are somewhat, I would say, somewhat expansionist. And the United States, a huge power, somewhat expansionist. You know, we're going to expand our influence. Imagine if the United States and China didn't do business with one another. We didn't buy Chinese stuff. I mean, you guys can imagine this now. I mean, I don't think that you may be able to imagine what it would be like to live without Chinese goods. Back in the day, and I'm talking about, pre-Nixon, communist China was seen as a huge threat to the United States. We did not do business with China. We didn't have many Chinese-made goods here. And they were nuclear power. They were a huge threat, and we constantly had this threat from China. Like, oh my gosh, there could be a war with China. Okay. What do you think about China now? Do you think we'd have a war with China? Do you think that's possible? What would happen to China if we had a war with China?
Both died.
Well, besides the violence, which would be bad, but what would happen to China? What would happen to their economy?
It would affect both of our economies.
Yeah, we are so intertwined through commerce now that we are a huge customer of China. I mean, every single one of you guys right now has Chinese goods on you. Where do you think this was made?
It's a symbol. No, I'm just kidding.
It was a symbol. It was designed in California and made in China.
Yeah.
Right? Where do you think this was made? China. Where do you think this was made?
China.
Probably China. This key fob for my car, where do you think this was made? China. Look at your shirt. Look at your clothes. Where do you think they were made? China. That camera, it's a Sony camera. Guess where Sony has that manufactured? They don't make it in Japan, they make it in China now, right? So we have a huge, we are a huge market for China. Okay? Likewise, what are the Chinese? What have they bought of Americans? You guys know this? Land and currency. China owns a huge amount of U.S. currency, by the way. whether you think it's good or bad. They own a huge amount of US currency. If they get in a war with us, what happens? We say, hey, we're not giving you that money back, right? So, and your land, we're gonna confiscate it all, right? So there's a huge incentive now for us not to go have a war with China. And what you hear now bandied about by politicians is a trade war. So what they're saying is, well, we're gonna charge more taxes on your goods. Chinese goods come here, we're gonna charge more taxes. You know, we're not gonna let those come in because it's taking away American jobs and this and that. And you can argue that point, because some people would say that actually we're creating more American jobs because of the commerce with China. What we're losing is the manufacturing jobs, but we create more jobs in other areas. And other people argue against that. And so people say, well, you know, we're gonna put, trade restrictions on China, and the Chinese say, well, we're not gonna allow you to sell Buicks in China. By the way, GM cars are big sellers in China. A lot of Chinese buy a lot of GM cars. When you go to China, you'll see a lot of GM cars driving around, General Motors cars. And so you see these kind of things, right? I always maintain the fastest way for a politician to get unelected is to slap tariffs on China. I was at Best Buy the other day. You can buy a 60-inch flat screen LED TV for like $500 now, right? If that TV suddenly costs $3,000, people are gonna be pissed off. We are addicted to cheap Chinese goods. And that's the quickest way for a politician to have their constituency become really pissed off. Whether they're conservative or liberal, doesn't matter. Okay? So I think, but this is exactly what I'm talking about when I talked about the example of the Buddha teaching the merchants, right? That we're less likely to do violent, bad karma things with China because we have this entangled commerce relationship with them. We're less likely to go over there and start bayoneting people and killing people and vice versa because we have this relationship, this mutually beneficial relationship. Okay? Now, you can argue that it's one-sided, and people argue about this, and they work very hard to try to make something balanced, a balanced relationship. And the controversy now over the NAFTA treaty and this kind of thing, it's the same kind of deal. So yes, we can argue about the specifics of the commerce relationship, but the commerce relationship in general is something that fosters peace. It fosters us not killing our fellow human being. And that is probably a really good thing. And this is what the example of the Buddha teaching the merchants is symbolizing. Okay? And again, if you guys are in business school, everybody's saying, oh, business is evil, all this kind of stuff. You always hear about this. Oh, you sold out, you're in business school. No. From a Buddhist perspective, business is a good thing. Okay? Very good thing. So I think it's a very good example. I like that example a lot. All right. And then the Buddha decides to teach, and that's where we're going to pick up today. We're going to talk about the Buddha going out and deciding to teach. In general, he teaches his 5 former colleagues who thought he sold out, and they see him, and then they realize, oh, wait a minute, he's got it now, so maybe we're going to actually go and follow him. Okay? And the Buddha realizes some very, very important things when he gets enlightened. We're going to talk about that today. And this comes to the heart of Buddhism. I have to drink decaf coffee now, so this is why I'm not quite here. This is why this. Okay, turn all these off. Here, I want a nice, natural light environment. Because remember, I'm a hippie from Santa Cruz, so that's where we like things. Okay. All right, here we see. So this is about where your slides are going to lead off. I mean, your test is going to lead up to here. Okay. So up to here for your test, you should be good.
We just need to know that, and then everything on that we're going to be going over is not on the test? It's
going to be on the next test, okay? But one thing is kind of that overlaps a little bit is this idea of when the Buddha, in the night before he becomes enlightened, what he realizes. And this is a very, very important thing. I really want to get to this today and talk to you at some length about this, because this is really, I think, the heart of Buddhism. And it makes Buddhism different from all other religions. And I believe I will talk in some detail about this. Let me go back to this slide here. All right, remember this part. This is the final night before Siddhartha becomes enlightened. In the first part of the night, he develops these mental powers to recollect his past lives. The middle night, he develops the mental power to see the past lives of others. And from this, he understands the law of karma. And right before dawn, he has a very, very special realization. He realizes that all things arise, all things in the universe are dependent on prior causes. This is the fundamental key notion of Buddhism, and in my opinion separates Buddhism from all other religions, makes Buddhism really quite unique. Also makes Buddhism quite compatible with modern science. Okay? This is, I think, a really amazing thing. So this is a thing we're going to talk about now a little bit. What is the special part about Buddhism? Okay? And the Buddha said, when this arises, that becomes. Okay? And what this means is that all the things that we perceive in this world are dependent on some previous action. Nothing appears by itself. Things aren't just there. Everything has some prior cause to it. Everything we experience appears in the context of other things that are in themselves dependent on yet other things ad infinitum. And this makes up a tapestry of our reality, all these cause and effects. So this is something, again, you know, on a lonely, rainy night, sitting by yourself in your room, you know, maybe with a nice cup of black, strong coffee. You know, maybe some people might be using other substances. You take your choice. But in one of those reflective, pensive moments where you're by yourself and you're contemplating reality, okay, this is the thing that you can think about. Okay? And again, not just intellectually, because intellectually it's very easy. Okay? Intuitively, understanding this intuitively is very mind-blowing and mind-expanding. Okay? That everything arises from some previous cause. Okay? We can look at ourselves, right? Why are you here? Why are you here? Well, according to Freud, it's an uncomfortable truth and you don't want to think about it. You repress this, but you're here because your parents did the nasty. And many of you are going, ugh, I don't want to think about that, right? That's a typical Freud would predict that reaction, right? But you're here because your parents conceived you. Say it in a nice way. And your parents are here because somebody conceived them, on and on and on and on and on and back, you know, to the beginning of the humans, and then, you know, there were non-human things that mutated into human beings way back when, you know, all the way back to the origin of life, and then the idea now that life has an origin in, you know, certain kinds of organic and other kinds of matter, right? And there's actually been a lot of research done that recently, so it's really quite interesting. Again, you can follow, you can trace back, you know, your existence to prior causes all the way back to the Big Bang, right? Big Bang, we know in science, is, you know, the beginning of our universe. And even now, physicists are speculating and doing some studies about probably what occurred before the Big Bang. So we're starting to maybe even peer back, you know, extend our senses through scientific inquiry, maybe a little bit before the Big Bang. Okay? And that's about the limit of our cognitive and imaginative and scientific ability to perceive reality. You can go back that far. But going back that far, everything in our known universe has a prior cause. Okay? Everything has a prior cause. So you can just think about your own life. You have a prior cause, right? Your parents had a prior cause. But think about anything else in our reality. Everything has a prior cause. Now, somebody will raise their hand and say, well, you know, I'm a Christian and, you know, I believe in God, and God has always been there. I've been taught that God is always there. God has always been there. God will always be there. God has no prior cause. And I would say that's right. If you're a Christian, that's what your belief is. But from a Buddhist perspective, there is no empirical evidence of that. You cannot demonstrate to me consensus reality through a scientific, objective study that there is God. All you have is your belief. Okay? And as a Buddhist, I'm going to say, yeah, you have to show me that there was, how this being is there that's always been there. You have to prove that to me. Because if I look in the universe, all I see is things that have prior causes. And gods, demons, spiritual entities in Buddhism, they either come out of Buddhism or come out of the culture that Buddhism's in, all are considered to have prior causes. Okay, just like human beings. And so they are subject to the laws of karma. I'm going to talk about that next. Okay? So they're subject to the laws of karma. So there are nothing is permanent. Okay? Having prior causes means that everything is constantly changing. Because one thing causes another cause comes and causes something else, causes something else. Things are constantly changing. Yes?
Is it basically like they're talking about entropy?
You can graft scientific, I don't want to say theories, because entropy is not really a theory, it's really considered to be a law. You can graft these onto Buddhism, and they fit very well. So you guys know about the law of entropy? That energy is constantly moving toward a more disorganized state. And then what happens is then there's things that go against entropy. They sort of backtrack in entropy, such as life, right? You know, the law of entropy, you know, which is made up of looking at gases and things like that, physical matter. Life actually seems to go a little bit against the law of entropy, at least temporarily, okay? Like an eddy, right? Because we're actually very complicated things, and we tend to evolve. So you can graft that on there. It would fit to some degree, right? But things are always changing. Things are always in flux because one thing causes another thing, right? And what happens is, imagine a pond. This was a lecture I saw. A very famous Buddhist teacher talks about this. Imagine a pond, and say that pond is our reality, and you drop a stone into that, and you get a wave in the pond, right? You get a splash, right? Makes a wave. And it's a certain pattern, very simple pattern. You drop another rock in there, and there's another pattern. So you have the first pattern and the second pattern. You drop another rock, and now there's another pattern. And imagine dropping infinite amounts of rocks into the pattern, and the patterns, really become incredibly, infinitely complicated. Our reality, what we perceive as reality, is that infinitely complicated ripples of the water. And does that make sense? That's the metaphor. Our reality, infinitely complicated reality of cause and effect, right? You drop the rock into the water, it makes a wave, right? There's a cause and an effect. And you imagine infinite amount of those rocks dropping into the water gets ripple patterns that become infinitely complicated, okay, of all these cause and effects. That cause and effect, that tapestry of that stuff is what makes up our reality, according to Buddhism, okay? And I would say, according to Buddhism, and if you look at scientific theory, this also fits very well with how physicists view our reality, okay? That, you think about atoms and you think about subatomic particles, quarks and things like this, and the interactions of those things all go together, and then they make up, our reality, okay? But those reactions and everything that's going on, even at the subatomic level, all have prior causes. Those things are all there for a reason. They came from something else, right? So we have subatomic quarks because, a star blew up at the Big Bang and something happened, and then it created matter and rippled out a certain way, and then it coalesced in a certain way, and boom, there you have, this kind of subatomic particle or this atom. Right? So again, even modern science, this is very cognizant with modern science. So the Buddha had an amazing intuition about our reality that is only really now in the past few years being verified scientifically. So if this isn't a mind-blowing thing, it should be, that this is really an amazing insight into our reality. Okay? And this has a lot of implications. Any questions about this? Anybody? I mean, I think it's relatively easy to get intellectually, but to intuit the gravity of this is very difficult. Now, what does this have to do with karma? Okay. What's our definition of karma?
Action? Some sort of
Action. Karma is essentially cause and effect, right? I punch her, she pulls out a knife and stabs me, right? I go, man, you're the best student I've had in years. Here's a $100 bill. And she's like, oh, and she has this, and she's, oh, I'm full of love for the universe, and starts doing nice things for people, right? That's karma. That's cause and effect. So karma is essentially, if you want to think of it in a weird way, it's kind of like the unit of this thing that Buddha realized, okay? That everything has a prior cause, okay? Everything in our observable universe is subject to karma. Everything has a prior cause. Everything is a result of cause and effect, causal chains, right? Now, if you're a behavioral psychologist, you study applied behavior analysis, you're a behavioral psychologist, you're very happy that I'm saying these things, because this is how behaviorists view human behavior. They don't talk about physics and reality, but they talk about, our human behavior. This is how they view human behavior. Chains of causation, right? Reinforcers, cause something, I give her a $100 bill, I'm reinforcing her for being nice, right? I punch her, I'm giving her negative reinforcement for being mean, right? The behaviorists view human behavior almost the same way, as a sort of chain of cause and effect. But if you expand that to the entire reality, physical matter, consciousness, everything, that's sort of the Buddhist viewpoint. Yes?
Isn't there a divide, though, between people who believe karma accumulation affects you in this life and ones that think that it affects you in the next life?
No, there's no divide there. There's no difference between those things. Because the this life and the next life is, again, remember that Hindu circular time kind of thing. That Buddhists also come out of that tradition. So this life, that life, that's a dualistic meaning, which is really, which you transcend when you realize the complexity of this tapestry of reality, of all these cause and effects going on, that really things like that we make, like life and death and time and not time, and these kind of things, they lose their meaning. They don't have any meaning anymore. What you're really looking at is the cause and effects. So what kind of cause? So if I give her a little punch, boom, then her annoying professor, Well, I really punch her, there's another thing, right? She's going to the president, I lose my job, And so again, the quality of the karma, the quality of the rocks dropping into the water, has to do with when you're reborn and how you are reincarnated. All these kind of things, it has to do with that. But it's not just the simple thing. I punch her, but then he sees that. Right, so there's an effect on him, and she sees it. There's an effect on her. So it's not a simple punch here, and then she gets the effect. We have this one thing. It's always interacting with everything else simultaneously. So it becomes incredibly, incredibly complicated.
That's the
Yes.
method.
So is being enlightened being free from the karmic cycle, or is it understanding the karmic?
So if you understand the this is my take on it, and I think you would find other Buddhists who would disagree with me on this. This is my take. And I keep meaning to talk to my Buddhist teacher about this. But my take is, and then let's see Buddhists talk about this, that when you have a complete intellectual, complete experiential understanding of this, then you're no longer bound by the things going on in the system. Okay? That you see the whole thing, well, now I know how to not fall into that and be part of, just blindly be blown around by the different karma in the universe. I'm able to sort of like be in the world, but not necessarily be affected by it, because I have a complete understanding of it. And so this is, and when the Buddhists talk about blowing out of like nirvana, the definition of nirvana means to blow out. What they're blowing out is the misperception of reality. And so the Tibetan Buddhists especially talk about this. They talk about having pure perception, that enlightened beings have a pure perception of reality. They see beyond the dualities. They see the entire, this entire system and all this incredibly infinite, complicated interactions of all this cause and effect. And they can see that, and they can see that pure perception, that their perception then is no longer, or they are no longer subject to being in the sort of, being in the ocean of all these cause and effects. And this is the way the Tibetans really describe it this way.
So you're still in the cycle, you're just not affected by it?
You can be in the cycle but not be affected by it, unless you choose to be. And then again, when we talk about Mahayana Buddhism, that Mahayana Buddhists will choose to go back into this karmic world, immerse themselves in it in order to help other beings achieve enlightenment. And we'll talk about this Mahayana vow coming up, okay? Because there's some Buddhists who believe that. They're not going to get enlightened until everybody else is enlightened. Okay? And so even though they have this perception, they can achieve that pure perception, they hold off on the final achievement in order to help others. Right? So this is the fundamental. Now this is something I think a view of Buddhism, I don't think you're going to hear this from too many people. I know some of you guys may know about Buddhism. My guess is your Buddhist teachers haven't emphasized this point. I like to emphasize this point because as a psychology professor talking about Buddhism, this is where Buddhism is really, really scientific. So it really fits well with science. Okay? It's very nice. And it doesn't fit well with other religions. Because if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, if you're a Muslim, if you're some kind of Hindus, remember Hinduism can be anything, other kinds of religion, you have a fundamental belief or faith that there is something that has always existed that's not subject to cause and effect. If you're a Christian, there's a God out there. That God has always been there. That God will always be there. That God is unchanging. It's not affected by karma in the world. And this is antithetical to Buddhism. One of the reasons why Buddhists get called sometimes atheists. They're not really atheists. There can be plenty of gods and other non-human entities out there. They're just subject to this law of karma. They're subject to this idea that the world is made up of cause and effect. They're not beyond that. Okay? Yes.
I just want to clarify the emphasis. It's the karma, right?
Yes. And this you see in the life of the Buddha. This is why I showed you that slide where Buddha has these insights at the last night, because this is the key to his enlightenment, is realizing these things, realizing this cause and effect thing. Yes?
Doesn't it say somewhere in the Hare Krishna text that Buddhism exists just to bring atheists into the fold of God?
Yeah. From a Krishna standpoint, that's perfectly good. Yeah, sure. You know, Buddhists, yeah. It's basically, they got a little bit different viewpoint, but they're basically Hindus. You know, they believe in God. And they do believe, it's fine to believe in, you know, you'll see in Tibetan Buddhism, we have plenty of gods and goddesses. And if you want to look at those psychologically, like they're archetypes, or you want to say, no, they're actually real entities that are out there, it's fine. But they are, unless they're enlightened, they are subject to the laws of karma. Okay? Now, many of them are gods that have, you know, been subject to the law of karma who become enlightened. And then, again, then when they have the pure perception, you know, the karmic reality doesn't necessarily impinge on them. They can be in it, they can be out of it, doesn't really matter anymore. Now, of course, it's hard to talk about in that enlightened state, because if we try to talk about what it means to be enlightened, we're talking about it from an unenlightened state. Okay? That's like an ant crawling around on the ground trying to describe what it's like to be a human being, right? Really difficult. You know, for the ant, the human looks like this giant that walks around and puts this huge amounts of food on a picnic table, and you know, but that's not what a human experiences. Right? Human has a different perception. So when we try to talk about what it is to be enlightened, we always fall short. Right? So I'm going to fall short in that. You know, I'll tell you right up front. But from the life of the Buddha, what we glean is this idea, this key idea that all the other Buddhist insights come from, this idea of cause and effect. That we live in a world of cause and effect. Now, anybody here a science major? Anybody here study physics? Many behaviorists, right? If you study science, what you'll see is that modern scientific thought essentially has a very similar underlying philosophical viewpoint. Okay? That we don't go to biology and start studying biology, and you know, maybe we study a butterfly and we look at the, you know, how a butterfly functions and think, well, the butterfly just came into existence, just popped into being, right? Now, way back in the day, you know, people, you know, naturalists, whatever, describing nature, you know, they would say, yeah, God created all these creatures, and then we're just going and studying them and cataloging what God created, right? In the modern point of view, we don't really accept that anymore in science. We look at this butterfly and we go, well, this butterfly evolved from some other insect that evolved from something else, that there's all these, there's always prior causes. We look at molecular structures. We always assume that there's prior causes, okay? We look at physics. We always assume there's some prior cause. So this is a common, you know, viewpoint, even though it's not explicitly made in science, but science, you know, modern science believes that everything has prior causes as well. And again, if you extrapolate that, you can see that this idea that we live in a universe, in a reality that's made up of everything having a prior cause. Okay? So this is one of the great insights of Buddhism, which is why Buddhism and science get along so well. Yes?
How do we reconcile this idea that Buddhism is a very scientific religion, and the story of the Buddha's birth coming out of the mother's side, and the mother dying 7 days after? And
well, it doesn't mean that you get rid of mythology. It doesn't mean you get rid of these kind of stories. But you can take those things as a, how can I say this? You can take them as a reality. That's fine if you want to just believe those things happen. But even if you believe those things happen, there was a prior cause to them, right? You know, Buddha's mom didn't have a baby come out of her side without something happening previously before that, right? So that's still, even in the mythology, you know, things that don't seem like they're real, you know, you can still apply that concept of prior cause. Now, the one thing that is supreme in Buddhism, as it is in science, is observation, right? And the Buddha says, before he dies, he says, doubt everything, right? What does that statement, doubt everything, mean? What do we do in science? What are you guys going to do in Psych 301 when you do your project? What are you going to test?
Test and research.
What are you going to test? You're going to test a hypothesis. How do hypotheses work? How does hypothesis testing work?
So you develop a hypothesis and then
You
you
test it, but how does it function? It functions through falsification. It functions through doubting everything. So your null hypothesis is what? It's like, yeah, it's not true, right? So you doubt everything. And then if you find what do? You don't accept your alternate hypothesis. You just reject the null hypothesis, right? You say, well, maybe I can't doubt that as much, right? This is exactly what the Buddha says. Doubt everything. He's essentially, proclaiming that one of your ways of understanding reality is through hypothesis testing. I mean, this is amazing. You doubt everything. Don't take my word as dogma. Go figure it out for yourself. Hypothesis test in your own life. So all these things I'm telling you right now about Buddhism, cause and effect, you can go out and test this in your own life, all right? So what do you need to do? And this is a good homework example for you to do. A little homework for you. Go in your life today, and is there anything, see if you find anything in your life that is observably just existing and always has existed there. It's permanent, unchanging, always existing, or is it something that has a prior cause? And if you go out and do this little thought experiment, you will see that everything in your reality has some sort of prior cause. And if you do have something, well, I believe in God, and God's always been there. You have to demonstrate that. Demonstrate that to other people. Somebody who doesn't believe in that God. You can show me, if you can bring Jehovah down here and show me, here's this being, he's always been there forever, you can demonstrate that to me, I'll change my tune. There's a story about the Buddha. And the story goes like this. I'm going to paraphrase somewhat. But this, you get the basic idea. The Buddha is teaching in a city, and there's a young woman there who has had a baby, and her baby dies. And she's distraught. And she hears the Buddha, this enlightened holy man, is there preaching, and she figures, if anybody can help me bring my baby back, it's the Buddha. And so she takes her dead baby, and she goes before the Buddha, and she says, Lord Buddha, my baby's died. Please bring my baby back to life. And the Buddha says, okay. When you go down the city, and if you can bring me back one mustard seed from a family that has never lost anybody, I'll bring your baby back to life. So the woman is desperate. She goes down to town. She's knocking on everybody's door. Do you have a mustard seed? Yeah, we got a mustard seed. Has anybody died in your family? Well, yeah. Our next door. And she says it's the whole town. And finally, after she goes to every door in the town, knocks on every door, and finds nobody who has ever lost anybody, she goes back to the Buddha, and she now understands. And she buries her child, and she shaves off her hair, and she becomes a nun and decides to study the Buddha Dharma. Because what she realized? She realized that everything is impermanent. Okay? Everything is impermanent. Everything is constantly changing. And you can't go back. Okay? This is her great realization, right? And this is the great realization of the Buddha. That, if you go and look for something that is unchanging, something that's permanent, you will never find it. Okay? Everything is changing. Because of this cause and effect, everything is constantly changing. That our world, our reality is impermanent. Okay? And this is a very difficult thing for us to think about, because what we are addicted to is the idea that we fool ourselves constantly into thinking that first of all, that we ourselves, our sense of self, our I, our ego is permanent. Right? Every single one of us do that. Okay? So we go around acting as if we're permanent. We act as if we're going to live forever. And we don't like to think otherwise. But if we look not too far, we'll realize that that isn't the case. How many people here have grandparents who are alive? How many people here have great-grandparents who are alive? How many people here have great-great-grandparents who are alive? Yeah, not so much, right? So if you just even look in your own family, people that you're closest to, you'll realize that you only have to go back a pretty short amount of time, and to realize that everybody in your family has died. All those egos, all those people who went around and acted out their lives feeling as if they were permanent are now gone. Okay? And again, that brings up the uncomfortable subject of what's going to happen to us. That every single person in this room is at some point going to cease to exist, at least in this form. They will cease to exist. Ah, but you say, you Buddhists, I'm a good Hindu. And that's okay. I shuffle off this mortal coil. I shuffle off this mortal body. That's all right, because I'm going to be reborn, and I'll have a new body. And my soul is the permanent thing that goes around and around and around. And my soul has been there all the time. It's always been there. It always will be there. And the Buddhists say, sorry, I have a little problem to tell you about this. Your soul, that thing you thought was permanent, well, as Buddhists, we don't believe that. Because why? Because everything in the universe has a prior cause. And so the idea that your soul is this one thing that's permanent, that's going around from life to life to life to life to life, we have no empirical evidence of that. That instead what we have empirical evidence of is that you are made up of a bunch of that karma stuff, those ripples in the wave, those infinite ripples in the wave. Well, you seem to be maybe just what you consider to be your I, your ego, yourself, your Atman. It's just a little coalescing of some of those waves in the water bouncing around. And those waves in the water bouncing around are what you think of as you, and that is subject to the law of karma, cause and effect, and it's impermanent. And so again, the Buddhists have a different view of karma than non-Buddhists, than Hindus. Yes?
So do Buddhists still believe in reincarnation?
Yes.
Like Hindus do? So then what is their take on what happens?
Yeah,
to the
so
soul?
we asked the question then, what reincarnates? What reincarnates? This is a fundamental question about Buddhism. Again, this is also something that doesn't often get explicated when people teach about Buddhism, because this is a subtle thing. If you take your lay Buddhist, somebody lives in a village in Thailand and they're Buddhist, and you go talk to them about reincarnation. What's reincarnating? Oh, I'm going to reincarnate in the next life. They'll talk about it as if they're a Hindu. Okay? For the lay person, it doesn't really matter. Okay? But we are talking sort of philosophically here. We're talking at a little bit more specific level about Buddhism. And again, for Hindus and for early Christians, by the way, this permanent soul is reincarnating around until all the karmas are resolved and then it achieves enlightenment. For Buddhists, that soul is a problem. For most Buddhist schools, not all. There was a Buddhist school that did believe that the soul was permanent or relatively permanent. But most of the Buddhist schools, and this is the perception I'm going to give you from, or the idea I'm going to give you from most of the other Buddhist schools, is what we think of as this permanent soul is really just an aggregation of those interactions, those cause and effects. Now, those cause and effects, there's a habituation that happens with those things. That coalition of stuff, that cause and effect, might tend to hold together from life to life to life because of habit. Okay, so you imagine those waveforms reinforcing each other, right? And they continue to reinforce each other. And so again, when you reincarnate, you may end up with the same, some of those same patterns going on, but they're not permanent. So one way to think about this that is described, has been described by Buddhists before, is that think about this as like the United States Congress. Okay, we have a Congress, right? You guys know about the Congress? It's made up of what, 400 some odd people who get elected in all parts of the United States, and they come together in this Congress, this ego. Think of the Congress as an ego, and they do things, and they enact laws, and they don't do stuff, and especially nowadays, they don't do a lot of stuff, and they sit around, they collect their salary, they don't do a bunch of stuff, or they do stuff and do things. But then what happens is they go back, when Congress lets up, it's an election year, they go back, and some people are reelected, some people are replaced, other people are elected and replaced, and they come back, and Congress forms again. It's still Congress, it still has the same identity, it still does the same function, but it's not made up of the same things anymore. It may behave differently, right? Imagine our Congress today, right? Again, don't care if you're liberal or conservative. Imagine our Congress today, right? Our Congress today acts very differently than a Congress back in, let's say, 1964. It's the same body, it's the same identity, it's housed in the same building, but it behaves very differently. It's changed quite a bit. It's not permanent. So even though it seems like it's the same thing, right? If you think of an election cycle as sort of like a rebirth, like a reincarnation, right? Congress reincarnates, it's still Congress, but it's not Congress. It's not the same. It's changed. And so if you want to think about the way the Buddhists think about human reincarnation is the same way. The Atman is essentially just a collection of karma. that changes from life to life to life, depending on what habits are picked up in that lifetime, okay? It's constantly changing, so it's not a permanent entity. So we're not, our ego is not a permanent thing. Our identity is not a permanent thing. It's constant, it changes throughout our life, and it changes between lives. Okay, so it's constantly in flux, okay? Even though it appears to us to be the same. And I'm going to talk about that, because for Buddhism, that appearance of being the same, that appearance of permanence, is a fundamental misperception of our reality. And this is what Buddha is trying to correct through his system, is to get us to have to undo this fundamental misperception of reality, which is a necessary cause for enlightenment. If you want to be enlightened, you've got to undo your seeing everything incorrectly. And we constantly go around treating everything in the universe as if it is permanent. And this is the fundamental misperception of reality we have. That's first over here.
So, do you need to die to be reincarnated? If time isn't linear, can you be reincarnated before you die?
Well, let's put it another way. You are constantly changing, okay? You are changing while you're alive, you're changing in between lives, you're changing in the next life. You are constantly, you're impermanent, you're always in a state of flux. You're constantly changing, okay? Things appear to be the same because, again, there's habitual stuff, and you have a fundamental misperception of reality, but you're constantly changing, okay? So one way you could think of it is you're reincarnating every moment. You're constantly subject to changing and becoming yourself anew all the time, right? I mean, you guys are taking this class, right? The idea is that when you finish this class, you will be different than who you were when you started this class. You will have new influences, your mind will be different. You know, you're getting education here at the university. The idea is that when you finish your education here, you will be different than the person who started here. Can you remember what you were like when you were 15 years old? Are you that same person now? No, some things are similar about you. You take personality psychology, you learn the personality is relatively stable, but a lot of stuff is really different. I remember when I was 18 years old, I'm a really, really different person now. You know, I've changed, right? And you can have a sense of that flux in your own life if you pay attention to it. It's hard because we really want to hold on to that fundamental misperception about being permanent, about everything being permanent. We have a little addiction to that. Because to not think about that means we have to think about our own mortality, which is very difficult for us. Question, yes.
Is that change for the better, for the worse, or it can be?
It can be, and that is what karma is. So you've just defined good and bad karma. Okay, good karma, change for the better. What does better mean? Better means that you are closer to being able to undo this fundamental misperception of reality. Change for the worse means that you are more deluded, more believing that things are permanent, and farther away from undoing this misperception. How many of you guys have seen the movie The Matrix? Yes. All of you guys seen the movie. So The Matrix is, I would say, it's a rather crude example of this idea. Okay, it's a rather crude example. It's a very good movie, by the way. I love Keanu Reeves, but it gives you this idea, right? That we're living in the Matrix. We're living in this reality that is fundamentally a misperception of where we are, who we are, what we are, right? We live in this reality, and we live in the Matrix, right? And the Matrix is a very good example of this thing, dropping the rocks into the water and the wave pattern of the water. That's the Matrix, right? We're very much in this Matrix. We don't see reality. But if we can get out of the Matrix, we can't do it by taking a pill and waking up. What we have to do instead is we have to do the fundamental work of Buddhism. We're going to talk about that. How do you get out of the Matrix, right? You can't just take a pill. But we really wish that would be great, right? The Dalai Lama has said if we could just take a pill and reroute our brains, that would be great. But that hasn't happened yet. But we realize our true reality. Now, the true reality hopefully isn't we don't live in a barren landscape in pods that, ruled by machines. That would really suck. We don't have any inclination that that's really what's going on outside the Matrix. The Buddha did not come back and say, yeah, the Matrix out there, came back and said, no, enlightenment is good. It's good to get rid of this fundamental misperception. And then also in Buddhism, the idea, this is where the Matrix falls short as a metaphor, is that you don't just remove yourself from reality. That actually you stay in reality, your perception of it has just changed. Okay? It's different. The reality itself necessarily, all that karmic cause and effect doesn't necessarily change. It's just your perception of it changes. Okay? Yes?
Are you saying you don't necessarily become ignorant, you more detach yourself?
well, again, we're the ant describing the human at the picnic table, right? Yes, from the ant's point of view, it looks like we're detached, right? But from the Buddhist point of view, what the Buddhists tell us that no, we're not detached, we're actually more involved there, because one aspect of this undoing the misperception, having a pure perception of reality, is that we see, because we're in this matrix, is our reality, we see how interconnected we are. And we see how interconnected we are, this affects how we interact with other people. Because you are fundamentally totally connected to me, right? We're just these patterns of cause and effect. So really, you and I are really not that different. And so how does that affect my human behavior towards you? At a human behavior level, that means that I, really don't see you as any different than me, and something that really is causing you suffering also causes me suffering. And so what I want to do then is I want to help you not to suffer. In other words, I have compassion for you. And if you want to know in Buddhism, when the rubber meets the road, well, we talk about enlightened beings and misperceptions and fundamental stuff. Yeah, it's very theoretical. What does it mean to be enlightened when the rubber meets the road, as far as human behavior is concerned? Compassion. Okay? That enlightenment is compassion. So when you are compassionate toward another person, when another person's suffering bothers you enough that you feel that you want to help that other person, that is, at that moment, you are experiencing a little bit of enlightenment. Okay? Because we can experience this. We just had this fundamental misperception. The misperception is I'm me and you're you. Yeah, you're suffering. You're a homeless person on the street. You're suffering. Yikes. And that means that you're not me, and I'm going to stay in my thing. I'm just to look after me and my family and pick my money in the bank and make sure I'm not homeless. So, I don't want to end up like you, right? That's the perception that we normally have, this egoistic perception that we are permanent. Because I want to stay permanent. I want to keep my permanence. I never want to die. I never want to suffer. I'm going to keep my permanence. So I separate myself from you. But if I become a Buddha, then I see you suffering on the street, and I realize you're exactly the same as me. I am you. We are intimately connected. I'm connected with every single person. Remember, the Buddha recollects the past lives of everybody in that final light. We are not different. And I see you suffering, and I realize your suffering is my suffering. I know what it's like to be that, because I'm the same. And so then I feel compelled to help you. And that is a sense of compassion, and this is what defines enlightenment. Okay? Again, intellectually easy to say, experientially, intuitively very hard to do. We only get glimpses of this. So in some sense, and I'll talk about this when we get to Zen Buddhism, in some sense we're already all enlightened, at least according to some schools of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. We're already to some degree enlightened. We have the capacity for compassion. We have the capacity to see the connection between people. But because of this fundamental misperception of our own permanence that we hold on to, this wrong idea, I block that out because it's threatening to me, threatening to my sense of permanency. Does that make sense? That's a lot of really heavy stuff all at once. But this is the core of Buddhism. And this is the stuff that most people, I think, when you learn about Buddhism, won't tell you about Buddhism. So I'm going to give you the core stuff first, and then we'll get into the specifics a little bit later. But I want to give you the core of this first, because this is really where it is. And this is why it is different than all other religions, most other religions. Okay? Yes?
Is it like an oversoul thing?
No. No. You're thinking dualistically. I and thou, it and them, me and it, right? It's not dualistic. It is this pattern of cause and effect that we're all part of, that we're all immersed in, that makes us who we are. And we don't realize that because we want to hold on to this fundamental sense that we are this permanent entity. Okay? And so then we see it's us and then God and all these permanent things out there because they help us to keep this illusion of permanency with ourselves. Now, intellectually, we all know that we're not permanent. I mean, I just told you that, you know how many people here have great-great-great-grandparents alive, and you all realize you don't, right? So we know intellectually that we're going to die. We know our ancestors died. But that's different than fundamentally realizing that at a level where it influences our behavior, okay? And this is the difference between the Buddhas and us, okay? We don't have that fundamental realization. We may get little glimpses of it. you know, little glimpses of it from time to time. We feel compassion for people, right? We saw the Las Vegas shooters, that horrible rampage in Las Vegas, horrible thing, you know, it happened. How many people saw that, and maybe you knew somebody who was there, and for a moment you had a little sense of compassion. God, what would it have been like if I was there? It would have been horrible. I feel so bad for the people who were there. And for a moment you had compassion. Maybe somebody said, you know, donate to Las Vegas. Oh, I'm going to send them some money, right? And you sent $20, or the hurricanes or something like that. For that little bit of a moment, you had a little taste, just a little taste of compassion, a little taste of enlightenment for that moment. But imagine 24/7, 365 having that sense of compassion for all beings out there. That would give you, maybe you can try to get a sense of that's what it would be like to be enlightened. Again, it's the ant looking up at the human at the table. Yes?
Wouldn't you become numb if you're just like so one-sided?
Well, what happens is we become numb. Why do we become numb? Because we glimpse that compassion. We see people get shot in Las Vegas. And then that reminds us of our own mortality. And so what we do is, I don't want to deal with it. We block it out, right? So I mean, I do this. I mean, I'm scrolling on Facebook, you know, oh, Las Vegas shooting, Las Vegas shooting, Las Vegas. Oh, I got, you know, overwhelmed. I have all these students. I have a bunch of students who were there. You know, luckily none of them got shot. You know, but they're traumatized. Like, I can't take it anymore. I just scroll down. You know, oh, here's a funny cat video. You know, I'll watch that. Right? Oh, numb. I'm just going to numb myself to this because it's overwhelming to me. Because I'm holding on, cherishing this sense of permanency that I have about me. You know, and so I just get numb to it. Right? And again, the process of Buddhism, the process of becoming enlightened is to some degree, you can characterize it as unnumbing yourself to this, unnumbing yourself to the suffering of human beings. It's hard to do because we get overwhelmed by this suffering. There's so much suffering in the world. I mean, you know, if you don't believe me, again, you can apply Buddha's principle of doubt everything. Just pick up the news. I don't care if it, you know, the real news, not the fake news. You know, just look at the news, look at the newspaper, look at what's going on around you. You know, you don't want to believe the news. Get in the car and drive to Northern California right now, and you'll see. I mean, there's suffering everywhere. You know, you know, there's a lot of suffering, and a lot of it is caused because of this misperception that we have. Right? Yes.
Would you say that meditation is one of the tools that
Yes.
we use to slow
Yes,
down
and we're going to talk about
and
that.
see more of these
Yes.
patterns all at once,
Yes.
and therefore continue our journey?
Absolutely. Meditation is one of the key important tools. Not the only one, but a key one. We're going to talk about that. Yes.
I was just gonna say, like, what about the other side of the spectrum of like feeling too much for
Yeah.
situations?
Well,
like
you know, that's also a problem. You can be overwhelmed by the suffering. And then what happens is that, then you no longer can feel really compassionate for others because you're so overwhelmed by it, right? So again, the process of Buddhism, the path of Buddhism is, you know, part of it has to do with meditation. There's different kinds of meditation. Some of the meditation is to strengthen you mentally so that you can deal with all this, you know, suffering. You know, it's not just become, because you've been numb for so long, you've walled yourself off, and suddenly the walls open up, and it's like a tsunami, and you're just flooded with it. Right, and this is, for some people who start studying Buddhism, this is something that starts happening to them. You know, suddenly they're just opened up and they're just overwhelmed by all this stuff. So again, meditation, again, there's different types I'll talk about, you can help with this. Right, this is one of the tools. Also, livelihood, lifestyle, also very important. We're going to go over this pretty soon. I think we'll get to it today. Yes?
So is enlightenment like finding like a perfect amount of compassionate?
The perfect amount is always compassion all the time for everybody. But again, we're the ant trying to describe the human. So, you know, for us to talk about that, you know, in our level, with our impure perception is really not, it's just words, right? But that, if I was going to tell you the words, that would be the words, right? Yes?
I just feel like you'd be sad all the time.
The thing is, what you find with Buddhist teachers, they've actually done scientific experiments on this. They take these Buddhist guys who've meditated, these meditation Buddhist monks who meditate all the time. They stick them in MRI machines, you know, like Dr. Key does, and they found that the pleasure centers of the brain are permanently lit up. And they also find that that's proportionate, the pleasure centers of the brain are proportionate to the amount of time you spend meditating. So even a little bit of meditation practice can actually activate these things. So what you find is that these Buddhist monks, once they get closer to having a pure perception, actually become happier because they're not fooling themselves anymore, you know? And so you see the suffering, but you also see that, you know, everybody is connected. You also see the beauty that everybody is connected and everybody is, you know, together, and that we're not these separate beings who have to go around hating each other and striving for our own self-aggrandizement, you know, at the cost of other people. You know, but we're actually all connected, and we're all, you know, this reality, this matrix is actually very beautiful because of this connection that we all have amongst ourselves. So we find actually that people who really make progress toward this through meditation practice are very happy. And this has actually now been empirically verified. There have been a lot of studies done on this, good scientific studies. Yes?
I mean, I agree that compassion brings joy, but is that saying, because you say compassion all the time for everybody, does that mean everyone is deserving of compassion? I mean, what
Yes.
about
Yes,
Hitler?
because Hitler is, from a Buddhist perspective, Hitler is connected to you, and you're connected to Hitler, okay? Now, I asked my teacher this once, right, because I thought, I'd be cheeky. I asked him once, I said, well, okay, what's the deal? So, we're supposed to love everybody, have compassion for everybody, like, look at Hitler. I said this to him, look at Hitler, rat bastard, killed millions and millions of people. And what if I could go back in time and kill Hitler? Wouldn't that be a good thing? And he told me, he goes, well, there's actually a Buddhist story about the Buddha in one of his previous lives. Had the same thing, basically, there's a horrible person and Buddha has a chance to go and kill the guy and save all these people's lives. And the question was, would he suffer the bad karma for that? And for us, with impure perception, yes, we would suffer the bad karma. If I were to go back and kill Hitler, which maybe I would do because I'm compassionate toward everybody, I don't want all these millions of people to die, I would still have to suffer the bad karma for that. If the Buddha went back and killed Hitler, this is what my teacher told me, the Buddha would suffer the bad karma for that because you can't, it's cause and effect. It's like a physical property of the universe, right? The Buddha would suffer the bad karma for that, but because he's a Buddha and has pure perception, the suffering would be like that. That's what he told me. So yes, but that doesn't mean you don't have compassion for Hitler. You have infinite compassion for Hitler. You realize that Hitler is going to go back and make really, really bad karma. And if you kill him, he will no longer make that bad karma. He'll be better off being killed by you, right? Now, from impure perception, our own selfish motivations get mixed in with that. If you're a Buddha, you can see that clearly, okay? But we as impure beings cannot see that. And we might do it, but it's not the same. If a Buddha does it, Buddha knows what they're doing, right? But yes, you'd have infinite compassion for everybody. Because again, Hitler is no different than you. You are part of Hitler, Hitler is you. This is very difficult for people to see. It doesn't mean that you wouldn't necessarily kill him if you had the chance, but you also realize that you are intimately connected with him. That he is part of this matrix. Okay? It's a very good question, though. I thought I was so smart to ask my teacher that. Like, ask me cheeky, ask him. He had a good answer for me. Yes.
Would you have worse karma if you influence Hitler to do something versus influencing someone else?
Depends what you influenced him. So there was a guy, and again, you guys will all take the Nazi Germany class next semester, right? History Psych 340, and we'll tell you about this guy, Felix Kirsten, who was Himmler. Himmler was the second in command in Nazi Germany. He was Himmler's doctor, and he was a massage therapist, Chinese doctor guy, and he was the only guy who could cure Himmler of these horrific stomach pains that he had. And Kirsten didn't want to do the job. He was they put a gun to his head, essentially made him do it. But once he did it, he was actually able to influence Himmler to not, put a bunch of Jews in concentration camps, and he was able to get a bunch of Jews released near the end of the war. He was able to use his position, for good. Kirsten was a good guy. The good guy in a bad position. He had to work with Himmler, who wants to work with Himmler, right? But what he did is he did whatever he could to try to help people. And so this is a very good, we're talking about Buddhism in this class, not Nazis, but this is a very good example of you do what you can do, right? So again, we talk about compassion, again, we've talked about all this theoretical stuff, and cause and effect and all this stuff. But again, as human beings, we do whatever we can do in the position that we're in. This is how we work on our karma, right? Kirsten could have just said, well, I'm going to take care of my family and make sure the Nazis don't shoot them and make money and just, go about my day. I don't have to care about all these Jews and these other people. But instead he said, no, those people, they're suffering. And I could be, tomorrow it could be me that they're going to persecute. So I'm going to do what I can do in my situation to try to make things better. And this is something that we all can do, right? We all can do this. We can all try, whatever position we're in life, we can try to, make things better for everybody, right? And it could be that you recycle your garbage. It could be that you drive an electric car. It could be that that you volunteer time working with prisoners, or you work with autistic kids, or whatever it might be. There's something that you can do to make the world a better place, to lessen the suffering in the world. And again, this works on your karma. This works on your cause and effect. It creates a habitual pattern more toward, getting away from this misperception of reality and more toward, seeing things as they really are, okay? And that will engender more compassion, and it becomes a positive feedback loop. You get more and more compassion. Okay? Yes?
How do you define things like good and bad? Because what you do is good, somebody else could perceive it as bad.
Yeah, so see, my friend, you are stuck in this thinking about things in a dualistic way. So again, if you think about things in terms of this cause and effect stuff, you get beyond that dualism, right? It's good and bad. Again, from a Buddhist point of view, it's good if it helps you to reduce this misperception of reality, and it's bad if it reinforces this sense of everything is permanent, right? But it's obviously more, it's not an either or. I mean, there's a lot of gray area. In fact, most of reality is this gray area. And this is why, as human beings, from a Buddhist point of view, we need to check our behavior very well. Why we need to examine our own motivations for things. Because a lot of times, we're doing something, it's good, but it also there's some sort of self-interest mixed in with that, right? And again, as impermanent beings, we don't need to beat ourselves up over that, because we're impermanent beings. We are going to have self-interest a lot of times, but just to become aware of that. And again, part of meditation practice is becoming aware of that. And meditation practice is sort of a pure point of view where you can sit down with not a lot of distractions, sort of examine that in yourself a little bit. And it gives you sort of an exercise. You're exercising that reflective muscle of your ability to sort of check your own motivations of things.
So if there is no things like good or bad, then
There is things that are good and bad, but they're relative. Okay, that's what I'm trying to get across. They're relative, but the final relative position is whether or not this is reinforcing your view of reality as permanent or seeing reality as it really is, which is impermanent. Okay, or understanding reality as permanent and impermanent. That's sort of, for Buddhists, that's sort of the fundamental thing. That's why I harp on this point so much and spend so much time talking about it, because it is absolutely key to Buddhism. This is where Buddha's insights come from. Everything else that we're going to talk about Buddhism comes from this insight. Okay? And again, I want to give you the scope of this, of how incredibly vast this insight is and how very incredibly difficult it is to get. It's not an easy insight to really intuit and really, really understand. But it is absolutely important, and the process of Buddhism is to work toward this insight.